talk a little bit. Oh yeah, that's good. Thank you. And then I'll talk about the risk management. I'll give you a few pointers to what kind of risk management strategy you should apply. And I'll be touching upon the subjects here just to have a few examples of what risks could be and how you could mitigate them. It will not be an extensive risk mapping of all these areas, of course, because that takes too far. But I'll give some examples and some meditation just to put you in the right track on what do I think is important when we find risks, and what do I think is important in how to mitigate them. And of course, all of this today is going to be completely subjective and based on personal experience and my work in this business. Yeah, shoot me. Let me just go to the next slide here. So yeah, you have a background. Did not spend time on that. You can always find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to discuss with any of you if you have additional questions about what else I do. So why do we do stakeholder mapping? Yeah, and by the definition, and the reason, there's a guy called Edward Freeman here that did a definition, and he says it's about finding out individuals who can affect what you do. And this is the traditional way. Why I have brought this definition here is because this guy also says something very important, that stakeholder mapping is also about affecting who is affected by the stuff that you do and the organization you have. So this is of course evidence, and since you have a business that are working in the healthcare space, you know who are affected by your business and your organizations and your actions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Hopefully you know that by yourself. If you don't, then you probably should rewind and consider your business again. So I'll be focusing on what I think is important in the stakeholder mapping, which is to identify who and what are crucial to your success, and find out how they take, what makes them work, what gets them up in the morning, what are the drivers, and if they have superpowers, which they hopefully have, because that's why you're mapping them out, how do you activate those superpowers? So if you know Iron Man, how do you get him to mobilize the stuff he can do for you, so you have that available when you need it. Another thing is to find out in the stakeholder mapping who are actually the biggest threats to you and your business. What do they think? How do they act? Why do they do that? And how can you nerf or reduce the impact to your business? So this is all about how to operate, because you have a limited amount of time and efforts and money, of course, and resources. So you need to find out, where should I put my efforts? Where should I invest? Where should I sow my plants and my seeds for them to grow up in a way that they can help me? And I only have limited number of opportunities. So I need to be very, very careful and selective about where I put my effort in investing in stakeholder mapping and the people that can help me. Some will say that this is very similar to networking. So who do you hang out with? Who do you talk with? Who do you buy drinks and all that? And it also has an impact, but I'll leave the networking out of it and just try to focus on the stakeholder mapping. So let me start by showing you a completely useless stakeholder map. This is a very, very excellent, I think it's a Miro example of a stakeholder map that maps out that you have a financial institution and business consultant and management and suppliers and retailers, and then it's subdivided into groups. And then this is all well and good, because this kind of maps out what is your world, what does it look like? But it's not a stakeholder map. And the reason it's not a stakeholder map, because you end up in the leaves of this tree, you end up with like a board of directors, and that's essentially useless, because who are the board of directors? They are individuals, and individuals have different drivers and different motivations and different reasons for doing what they do. So you have learned absolutely nothing by mapping this out at this level. If you were going out and then did individual mapping of the actual stakeholders by name, then you'd be a different matter, which is why I also put this one up, which is not entirely useless, because it actually has names in it. And if you can read what it says, well, for each name, there are a number of questions asked, like, what is the role? What matters? What information is needed? What kind of engagement? What kind of obstacles? And now now it gets interesting, because now we're looking at stakeholders who are individuals, who have a who have an opinion. They are human beings. They have feelings, they have emotions, they have jobs, they have family, they like cars or they don't, or they ride horses or they dance salsa, whatever. You need to find out what these guys do, because this is the ticket to getting the support you need when you need it. And knowing your stakeholders allow you to do stuff at the right time, at the right place, that put them on your side, and can mobilize them at the time when you need it. So it's a little bit like you're sailing in the sea, and you need to map out the sea you're sailing at. And it's not mapping out where you're sailing is okay as long as the weather is nice and calm and you have good visibility and you can see the reefs and you can see the mountains and you can see the other ships. So you can navigate, and it's safe and it's nice and it's cozy and everything is happy and feel good. Then you get a storm and suddenly you are spending all your time trying to keep the boat upright, and you don't have time to orientate yourself about where you are, what you're sailing into, where things are and how to avoid it. So at that point, you need to be able to push buttons to get help. And if you don't have your stakeholders already mapped out and know exactly what to do and who to call and what to say, then you are in a bad place. So this is about not necessarily saving your business, but knowing how to navigate, knowing the landscape, knowing the depth of the sea, knowing where the reefs are, knowing where the sharks lurk and all that. So before we go into the considerations, I think I was actually obligated to give you some stakeholder mapping tools so you can work with for your homework, but I didn't find any of them sufficient for what I think is important, and I don't want to spend you guys time mapping out a lot of stuff that is basically redundant or useless. So I've tried to distill the things that I think is important, and if you can find a stakeholder mapping tool that reflect these needs, like some kind of, I think, a mind map kind of stakeholder, that would be great. But if you can find something else that has the same and can load the same kind of information, that's fine, as long as you focus on the things that you think is important for you. And these three things are what I think is important. You may have different opinion, which is fine. So take this as an inspiration and promise me that when you do your stakeholder mapping, you will put stuff in the stakeholder mapping that is actually useless, no, sorry, not useless, very, very useful information for you, for making your business work better and for solving problems and helping you out, because that's basically what we want to do. We want to open up the headlights and see what's on the road ahead so we can navigate. That's basically why we do this. So stakeholder people, even VCs are people. Some will refuse to believe that, me included, but they are actually people, which means that they are subject to interpretations and evaluations and studies. Usually they are pretty much alike in terms of what makes them tick, but there are some that has different interests. Maybe they like golfing too, or they have special interest that you can cater to. But knowing about these people is something that you can put on your agenda, because if you know a lot about them, you will be able to help yourself getting a better relationship with these guys and maybe using them in a way that they can benefit your business. Yes, besides coming with money. So what are they about? What do they do? What do they do? Where do they live? What kind of family do they have? Do they drive a Tesla? What makes them tick? Besides money, because that's always the thing with the VCs. Some of them are actually quite nice people, and those who are, if you spend energy and time on finding out who they are, talking to them, networking, you have a good chance of finding out what they are. So everybody is people, and you have to always remind yourself, this is people. You shouldn't consider it as just a business or just institutions. There's always people behind. But for the business part, I would consider them to be instead to be described as vectors. Businesses are run by individuals, and of course it goes as well for individuals, that you need to identify the individuals as well as possible behind the business. So the same rules go for these guys as for the stakeholder people. Find out who they are, what they want to do. But every business is a vector, in the sense that a business has a direction and a speed. So some of your competitors has a direction which is off by 20 degrees compared to your vector, but they have a much higher speed. And so you may consider them to be a threat, maybe because if they change the direction, they can be a bigger threat. So try to find out where are they going and how fast are they going there. So if one of your competitors get a $60 million capital investment, but they're heading in a different direction, they may not be dangerous, but knowing it will be very important, because your board will be asking you about, what about this business that got all this money? Are they a danger to you? Why are they that, or why are they not? So you need to be on top of the immediate competition and say, okay, so what are they doing, and what are they focusing on, and is that a problem for me? And if it is, should I consider changing that? Because otherwise, the board may be beating me up at some point. And then organizations in the way that I consider this to be like public organizations that has a non-commercial role, like public institutions, hospitals, regulatory institutions, all kinds of stuff that can affect your business. These are kind of static. They don't move a lot. They don't have a business goal. They don't develop commercial things. They don't change a lot. They usually have a fixed purpose. And of course you would know that, but what you really need to know is, how do they execute that purpose? What are the policies of these institutions? Because they may affect you, and you do not want to be surprised by having someone launching a policy that is adverse to your business at a point in time where you don't need it. So try to map out what they're doing, and find out how they affect you, so you can do whatever preventive actions you need to take care of. Okay, so if I go into the stakeholder map items, usually you always mark up the current role of an individual for your stakeholder map. But I think it's important to try to do some conjecture here and say, okay, this guy is maybe a board member in my organization right now. But what happens in a year or two? What would be his role then? Will he still be a board member? Will he be maybe the chairman of the board? Will he be out of my board? What kind of role will he then have? And so try to look at people and see if they also have direction, and maybe they also have some inertia. Where are they going as a person? What is their career? What would you say would be their career? So, for instance, I have spent a lot of time working with public institutions and government offices and ministerial offices in Denmark. And these guys they almost never buy anything, but they are very important to be on good terms with, because people in the ministry or in a higher place in the regional and hospital organizations, they can be huge blockers if they don't like what you do, and if they don't feel that what you do is aligned with what they want. But one thing is having a good vibe with the guy that is highly placed in a public organization that are buying your stuff. What is important is that this guy may be your friend now, and he will also be a part of your stakeholder mapping. But what may happen is that this guy can go out from a highly placed official position in a big organization like a hospital group or something, and he may very likely change into a highly placed consultant with Accenture or some other McKinsey or some other big consulting house, because they are very, very adept at recruiting highly placed officials, because they are buying their network, because they have inside knowledge, they have inside network, they know people. So suddenly you will have a guy now that was on your stakeholder map as a very important guy to help you into and keep things floating and moving along nicely inside the public institution where they bought your stuff. But now he's suddenly a highly placed director in a consulting company. And how does that affect your business? How does that affect your relationship? Because now it takes a turn. And if you knew that would be happening, you would be looking for who would be replacing him in that organization. And if you didn't do that, then you will suddenly see that the guy that replaces the previous manager in the hospital is a guy you don't know. You haven't cultivated this one because you didn't even know he existed, and you basically never even suspected that he would be doing the boss. And maybe this guy feels overlooked because you spent all your dinner dates on the other boss, and he felt like he was overlooked, and that was really bad. So this is so having this kind of holistic thinking about people are not static things. When you map out things, a stakeholder map is a static map, and this is a flaw in the stakeholder mapping discipline, basically, because nothing is static. People are moving, so businesses are moving, and everything's moving except VCs and public organizations. Maybe, well, I shouldn't be so harsh on these VCs, but the public organizations are also very, very static and don't move, and they never buy anything. But they have the people in those organizations, in the businesses, in your entire state, in your entire network. All of these people have directions and will move. And your job is to find out, what are they doing now? What kind of impact? are they on my side or against me? Like, are they a -10, which is a big problem because then they really don't like your face, or are they supportive of what you do? You need to find out where they are, because if you don't know where they are, you can't move them, and you wouldn't know if it's important and how to do that. So having a kind of like a status about where are people in terms of support, well, that's probably a very good thing, and you should probably work a little bit on that. Then there are the personal drivers. That's important as well, because if you don't know what drives them as person, it will be difficult for you to interpret what they will think and how they will do things. You will have like a generic framework of saying, well, this is a project manager in a hospital, so he will per definition think like this and do that, and he will have this procedure, and that can be, you can do some projections of his expected actions and attitudes toward a lot of different things by knowing what kind of roles he has and how he has executed that. But you will have a much more detailed picture if you know that he likes jazz music, he plays the piano, he has a band, and his wife sings. All of this is extremely important for obvious reasons, because if you know things about people because you are interested in people, this becomes a positive feedback loop, because people who feel you are interested in them as people, they respond positively, unless of course you're invasive, which wouldn't be smart. But having a genuine interest in what people do, why they do it, and how they do it, and where they do it, that's not invasiveness, that is compassionate human behavior. So be a person yourself. Don't be too remotely business-like. You know, the more personality, the more you show of you as a person and a human being, that makes you vulnerable in other people's eyes, and that kind of signals that you are open and able to interact with other people without being insecure. So people who are very business-like and very like facade and fronting, they are often interpreted as very unsecure, and that's okay. People can live with that, and it's not a problem. And you have your facade, and some countries this is like even a national sports to be very like stiff upper lip facade. But my experience is that in your interactions with people, if you give, you receive, and it's like with everything else. If you give, you get back. If you don't give, you don't get anything back. So you can't get to know about personal drivers for people and business drivers if you don't give them something of yourself. So if you start a conversation, hey, I think it's great that you watched Game of Thrones because I knew someone who acted in the forest or whatever kind of, and he had a tiny role, and then you can talk about that. So, but getting that discussion going is on you. It's, well, some of these guys, some of the networks, some of the stakeholders may be open and outgoing and assertive and extroverted, which is great, but you need to be it as well, because you are the one that needs to get this information by yourself. You can trust it from secondhand to some degree, but you need to be the one getting it, being there, meeting people, mapping them out. And this sounds very clinical and very organizational and very cynical as well. And it can seem like that when you put it up like this. So that's probably why I don't really like it. But anyone who wants to succeed in any kind of business would be doing this on autopilot all the time. Put yourself out there, be a person, interact, say stuff, open yourself, be vulnerable, and see what comes back. Sometimes people say, oh, what an idiot. Sometimes they'll say, oh, that's interesting. You know, I did actually such and such and such. And that's where your value counts. Then you get the back. Then you go, I noted that. And then you have buttons to push. And you need buttons to push, not because you want to use people, but at some point when you want to activate an ace in the hole, you need to know which one to do it with. And if you don't know what these people are about, you wouldn't know who to call. And you need to know who to call. So another part is interesting is the impact power of these stakeholders. If they have a lot of pull, then they are on the top of your list. If they don't, then they may be interesting, but it's probably not the people that you will call first. So knowing what the impact of their power is probably good as well, because like superheroes, they all have different superpowers. Some of them has a lot of superpowers, and some of them have minor superpowers. But knowing what they can do is also important. So this is, of course, an assessment, a guess maybe, but yeah. Related to that is the network. Depending on where they come from, they may or may not have a huge network. But this is important to try to get a feel for, because networks are usually invisible. One way of seeing it is if you go to LinkedIn and looking at them, you can see where they come from, what they did, and you can see how many connections they have, and you can guess a little bit about who would be, if that were you, who would be in my network. If you were like this position, you had that history, you have had that, had those jobs, who would be in your network? Like if you have a guy on a board that has a 10-year history in corporate banking and investment relations, you should have a good idea about what kind of network this guy has, and he should have on the list, because that would be very, very interesting. So dive into the people and find out what is their background, what do they stand on, and of course the impact power is about their ability to leverage that network, but that is probably an individual aspect that you need to assess. So domain knowledge, do these guys in your stakeholder map actually know what they're talking about? If they don't, and they don't know what you're talking about, then their value is drastically decreased, because knowledge or lack of knowledge will devaluate the operational impact of most of what they do. Because if they go to someone and say, hey, you should buy this because it's green, and then people say, what? That's not useful. So if you have stakeholders that has a good and detailed domain knowledge, they would be potentially a huge asset to you, because they will be knowing what they're talking about, and their peers will recognize that these guys knows what they're talking about and respect them for that, and listen more attentively to when they say something. And then, of course, there's the button part. Does this individual has a button you can activate, and what would that button be? Are there any specific activities you can do, either preventively or preemptively, or investment like is something you can do to put this stakeholder individual on your good side? So if you can move the stakeholder from a 0 to a 5 or 10 or maybe an 8 by doing some simple stuff, that would be very, very important to know. But you won't know it unless you know how to look for it. So you won't find anything if you don't look, right? So you need to look for things that, with a very small investment in time and money, or maybe even a big one, will move a specific individual from 2 to 8, for instance, on your supportive score. Because that's going to be the make or break of the support you get in the future, right? So that's probably the important part is what can I do about these stakeholders? It's just mapping them out and looking and say, that's very nice, but who cares? You need to turn this into something operational that can be leveraged when you need it. At some point you need it. When things go bad, you need to be able to push some buttons. You know that because you've probably already been in a bad spot and you needed to push some buttons to get something done. And the only thing you were able to do that is because at some point down the line, you invested some time in finding the button and pushing it in a way that that you make a better situation for this stakeholder person and yourself, and improve the relationship and put him on the +5+ side, for instance. So if you look at some of your most important stakeholders and then rewind and say, why are they my most important stakeholders? You will probably find out that at some point you help them fix the car or help them do something else that put you in a good relationship, so you can trust that they will be on your side if something goes bad. So on the business side, it's much the same strategy basically, but it's a bit different because at the business side you will not be looking at the visuals just now. That will come later, but you will be looking at what is the business doing, what did it did before, but most notably, what do you think they're going to be doing in the future? So, for instance, if I have a business that I'm in remote patient monitoring business, and I have not a competitor, I have another business in this space that does consulting on diet, and they employ coaches to consult with people on diets to reduce the impact of the diabetes type 2. This is something totally orthogonal, what would you call it, on a right angle to compared to what I do. We don't overlap in what we do in our business goals. But suddenly this other guy gets a huge investment, and I'm thinking, okay, if I were these guys, I would probably want to get into the remote patient monitoring part on the diabetes, because that's where the money is. So if they are in diabetes, they will automatically tick off a number of boxes in terms of what they can do, but it will also give me a very, very clear indication of where they could go from the point they are. And having that in mind, I can sort of like map out the business direction and say, okay, are they going left or right or center? And what is my estimation here? And what do I think will be the consequence? How will it impact me? And how do I consider that? So of course you need to find out also for the business side, are these guys on the same side as you, or will you go head to head at some point and be competitors? And then we are back with the people parts. And once you've identified the people, you go back to the one before them with the name, and then use that. But for the business, you also need to find out, besides the key people, what are the business drivers? What are they? What is keeping them alive? What is the reason that their investors invested? What do they think they will get out of it? And of course, what kind of impact will they have? How big a target are they painting? And is that target in direct conflict with yours? Or is it something that will sort of like be a ram to break through the walls after which you can follow? Or what will they be? If you can leverage them to put them in front of you as a ramming device to make holes in the wall so you can get easier through, that would be great. But you need to find out if they do that. So if you have a competitor doing the same as you and they have a lot more funding than you, then the trick is, of course, to find out how is that impact power applied, and how can you use that to your advantage. And one way is to say, okay, if you have an undeveloped market, someone investing a lot of money in developing that market will benefit you if you are in the same market, but with the twist that puts more value in your product than the other guys. So try to be in sort of like in the wake of the bigger ship, and then once they have broken through, then you break out and do stuff better than they did in a different direction, and then everybody's happy. And again, the network part, knowing you have a competitor does not mean you should not talk to these guys. You will probably find that many will be defensive once they find out, oh, you're the competitor, then they won't talk. But some will. And if you can make a good relationship with people maybe by convincing that you may not be competitors after all, because you have different directions and this and that, then you may be able to work together and doing stuff. And at some point, I had an experience where we had another company doing much the same, but also going into market, and we both had challenges getting something done. So we worked together on fixing that. So even though you are enemies, if you have a common enemy, a third party, then you may join forces for a while, because that's in your interest. I don't know if any of you guys have ever played diplomacy, but that's kind of like a backstabbing game where you want to win, and of course you make alliances on the fly to make sure you win. So you always make an alliance and then you backstab the other guys to get the best out of it. I think that's a very useful game, because it teaches you a bit about when you need to ally and when you're not, and also the consequences of breaking an alliance, which you want to consider the value of that alliance before you break it, because that has impact as well. And of course, like the people, there are buttons to push, there are stuff to do, there are things you can do to get them to help and work. So you would want to find out what are the buttons you push. And so then we have let me just hang on a second. Yeah. So we have the last one, the organizational map, which is, well, these are institutionalized organization, which is pretty much static. But it's, again, you want to know that the function they have, the purpose they have now, and the future. If you have a public institution that is responsible for regulating medical devices, you need to find out if they continue to do that, or if there's a high risk of this function being moved to another organization before you invest in finding out. You need to find out, are they supportive or not? Mostly these guys will be a zero, because they will take pains to avoid they'll take pains to avoid engaging with you. But I find that investing in people who are in the public space, in public institution and institutionalized staff, they travel around. So over the course of 10 years, I had a network of, I don't know, 50, 100 people that I was working tightly with in projects. And I did my very, very best to befriend every single one of them that I could, as much as I could, for as long as I could, because I like friends and I like making connections. And 10 years later, these project managers and as administrative assistants and secretaries and account managers, they were suddenly not on the floor. They were like department heads and managing directors of ministries and ministerial heads. And they were all over the place in boss jobs. And I was like, wow, how did I do that? How did I get connections that high level? The only thing I really did was being a nice guy, being interested in people, drinking coffee, having a beer with them. And then suddenly 10 years later, they're all bosses and we are on a good footing. So now that was really good. How did I do that? And actually I did the first one from this one back. I did what I like to do. I connected with people, I worked with them, I hang out with them, I invested in them, and they invested back in me. So having this kind of investment in people means that even though organizations are basically neutral and will take pains to be so, if you invest your time right, you may just be able to have very, very close relationships to the key people in those organizations by investing it early. So things will come back to either bite you in the ass or pat you on the shoulder, depending on how you spend your time. But I think I cannot understate how important the networking and the relationship with real people are. So you may think that the business is important, but you have to remember that at the end of the day, it's going to be the people that make or break your business. So investing in people is a very good part. And actually, if you feel that you're very busy and very stressed and and everything is boiling out, it's been proven from a physiological, psychological point of view that some of the best stress relief there is to take time out of your schedule to help people with whatever they need, paint a wall, move a car, whatever. But the fact that you take time and help people, even though you don't have the time, that's very beneficial for you. Actually, that's proven on a physical level, but it's also very beneficial for your relationship and your network. So take the time, make sure that, of course, that your family, which is your most important stakeholder at all, you get those time with the family that you need, but also work with people and be with people and prioritize that when you can. So getting back to the organization, of course, the organization will have some impact, and they will also have a charter, which is pretty much like very, very single-minded stuff. Like we have the charter to regulate medical devices in Denmark or France or Holland or whatever, and we will do it like managing the this and that, and delegating the authority to issue certificates on particular things like the CE mark and ISO 13485 to notified bodies that will do this and that on our behalf, kind of things. Find out what is their actual charter, why do they exist? Because if you at some point need to talk to these guys, you may know key people so you can influence them and have an informal discussion before you go public and go official. But when you go official, you need to know exactly what the charter is, because if you come to them with a problem or issue or something you need to discuss and it's outside the charter, you never even get the discussion. They just say, this is not a part of our business, so we won't answer your question. They don't have to answer a question if it's not in their charter. So knowing how to push the buttons in this case is also important. And also, of course, how do they operate normally? And if you know how, well, if it walks like a dog, it talks like a duck. If it walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, and looks like a duck, it's a duck. So if they do like this, they say like this, and they work like this, that's what they are, no matter the charter. So of course you have to correlate what is the charter and how do they actually do stuff in order to know where to put the button and how to press it. So from my point of view, these three things are the things you need to map out in your stakeholder map. You can map out a lot of other stuff, but do me a favor, and once you consider stuff to put on your stakeholder map, make sure that this stakeholder has buttons. So if you don't have buttons, why would it be there, right? It shouldn't be. So make sure it has button. If it should have button, put buttons on it. If it doesn't have buttons and never will have buttons, then it shouldn't be part of your stakeholder map, because you can't do anything with it except, yeah, well, the moon is a stakeholder. It will move the waters and tidal waters down there. Yeah, it will, but I can't do anything about it, so who cares, right? Don't spend time on stuff you can't influence. If you have some stakeholder that you really need to influence and you want to influence, but you can't, that's an entirely different matter. That's a question of finding out, okay, how do I get a position where this can be a stakeholder and I can push some buttons on this guy because I need it. Now that's interesting, because if I can identify stakeholders you want to have because you need to apply some buttons on it. Well, then that will be clearly evident to you, and then you should probably invest time and money and resources in finding out how to put that in your network. But that's what you call networking, so that you can go to the right places, do the right stuff to get the right contacts and right connections, and then you can have buttons. I need buttons. Okay, so stakeholder map is done, but it's not done because it's never finished, isn't it? It's dynamic. People change, organizations change, businesses change. So basically, the stakeholder map, once you've done it, it will be useful for a day or two, and then it will be out of date. So you need to iterate. Things change. You need to keep circling back to the stakeholder map, and circling back to the stakeholders, and following their, getting on Facebook with these guys, getting on LinkedIn, find out what they do, when they do it, when they change, how they work, what they try to, and what their interest is. LinkedIn is great for that, because some people are very expressive in LinkedIn. Facebook is good as well, but otherwise Google them, find out what they do. But keep circling back, keep updating, keep digging, learn more about people. Why are they what they are? Where did they come from? What did they do before? And then, well, search and replace. Find people that you think are more important and replace stakeholders with other stakeholders as you go. You can add to the map. So you end up with a stakeholder map of 530 people, all with buttons on it. That could be useful, or it could not. But stakeholders don't keep being interested. So if you at some point find out that their impact power is less and their alignment is less and they become insignificant, then push them in the back and put someone up there that are more important. So it's a floating thing. So when the shit hits the fan, or the fecal matter hits the air ventilator, you will need buttons to push, and eventually you will need it. And everybody does at some point. If you haven't tried it already, you probably will. So find the stakeholders and find the buttons, so you know how to operate them when you don't have the time to work it out. Because when the shit really hits the fan, you don't have time to find out. You need to know. You need to know now, what is my options and how can I do it? That's a tool. So get that fixed. Right? So just a couple of perspective here, what would be some moves that would be possible in a situation where you've done your job in doing out the stakeholder mapping? So one would be what I call the superhero move. You have an investor that has a kid with autism, which is a disease they see a lot, like ADHD, and autism is connected. But this guy has autism, a kid with autism, and he knows that this is a huge problem for the kid, and it's also a problem for the parents, because their kid has a problem with relating to real people and emotions and expressing those and that, and they really hate that. So what you can do is, okay, so I have an important investor with autism. Maybe I should put a program together and hire people with autism, which is called Asperger's. Hire them to do testing of my app, because Asperger's and autism people may be extremely talented in doing repetitive jobs, because that they feel very comfortable in repetition. So doing what you will call brain dead testing again and again and again is actually something they're very good at, because they enjoy it. They feel happy at doing that. So you can actually leverage these kind of people in a very useful position, testing stuff, and get a lot of value for that. And if you have the need and you have the opportunity, why not try to employ people with Asperger's to get their skills operational in testing, because it will be good for you. And now what happens is, down the road, this investor realizes that you actually hired people with autism, and he will or she will be very personally and emotionally involved in your business, because they now have a completely different relationship to you and what you do, because you have shown intelligence, compassion, ability to improvise, and made a good impression, which means that this investor now may not have the money you need, but they will be doing all they can to raise their network to help you get the money you need, because they think that you are a compassionate and very upstanding and very engaged and good person, which of course you are. And since you have clearly demonstrated that you have both brains and compassion, they will think that this is you're a good guy and I want to help you. That's a good move. So the only reason you can do this is because you did your stakeholder digging, so you know that the family has a kid with autism, right? So spend time on that. Find out what people are, what is their compassion, what is their issues, what do they, how can you reach them, how can you connect, and because you're going to need that. And then there's the this is kind of like on the good ones. But if there's competitors and stuff and people you don't like, well, you can have you can do the nerf move, like put people in here, and the superhero move, like is kind of the Iron Man thing. But the nerf mode is actually not fiction. This is something from real world that I've seen this done a couple of times, and the picture is a clear example that if in the space of competitive activity trackers, your competitors will do whatever they can to make you look silly, including taking your device and getting a pulse reading from a banana. And this is, I call this the nerf move, because you are basically taking the wind out of all the sales material and all the arguments. You can have the best bloody activity tracker in the entire world, but if your activity tracker can get an actual pulse from a banana, it's off the table. Nobody will take you seriously from that point. So if you have an ability to put a nerf move on the table and do it discreetly, take a pulse from a banana and put it quietly into the press or into the media, you will be able to really put things in place. And now this is a dick move. You know, this is not nice. This is, I won't say it's cruel, but it's definitely not nice. It's very competitive and it's desperate, but you can do it. And I've seen it done. I haven't done it myself because I think that's beneath me, but I'm also not a millionaire, so take that into account as well. I've seen people do this. I have heard it. I have it applied to myself. I had sales guys and yeah, but my such and such device can do this, and you know, we have competed ourselves with all the others, and all the others can take a pulse reading of a napkin or a banana or a pineapple or stuff. And they say that because they know that once they have let me know that there are competitors that can take a pulse of a napkin or a pineapple, I will put them in a place where I will never buy them. They know that. So even though it's a big move, it's a very powerful one. And if you don't want to move it or use this kind of move, then at least you should prepare for someone to use it against you. So if you are the one that has a device, you should probably test that it doesn't give meaningful readings in situations where it shouldn't, because someone else might make the nerf move on you, and you definitely do not want to be the subject and the target of such a thing, because it's devastating. Another example is one of the technologies I work with. It's like a face scanner that can scan your face and return a blood pressure, which is of course very meaningful, because if you can scan a face for a blood pressure, you don't need to have a hardware device with you. You can just use your smartphone. So that's like mind-blowingly intelligent. But I spoke with two competitors. I'm not working with any one of these, so funny. But one of the guys said about the other one that, hey, yeah, but this face recognition software could actually, you could put it in front of a statue and it will still tell you that the statue had a pulse and a blood pressure. And it was like, yeah, ha, what idiots. And they are really incompetent and so on. And he was not beneath it, because he felt that he had done technology that definitely could not take a blood pressure of a statue. So he felt safe saying that and exposing the other guys in a way that they were very bad light. So, but of course, once you have the knowledge, it's like you can't unsee, you can't unhear stuff. Once it's in your head, it's there and you can't ignore it. So they know that. So you can't unsee things, you can't unknow things. Once they're in your mind, once they're planted in your minds, they affect your decisions. And getting back and reevaluating stuff to move that decisions is some of the hardest thing to do. So if you're not going to do the nerf mode, and I definitely don't think you should, because basically people who does it are dicks, you should at least make sure that nobody can get that kind of power on you and your system. So please make sure you try your stuff out on a banana or whatever goes for a banana in your business, and make sure that it performs reasonably intelligent before you let anyone near it, especially the competitors. Right? Oh, that was his question. Sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, good. You have a question. That's excellent. Do you want to put it in the chat or take it after discussion?
As you prefer. I don't know if there is space at the end, or you want to do the question.
No, I have a few slides left, but just pop it up now. We'll take it now.
Okay, thank you. So for this topic, for example, how about the intended use of the device? Like antigen test, no? If you put an antigen test in your ear, the result will be negative. And it doesn't mean that the antigen test doesn't work. So I'm wondering, how do you try to, let's say, don't get screwed from, I'm thinking now about a competitor that is going to test our test, for example, no? In a way that is not in the intended use. So breaking any rule that we ask them to do, and maybe is going to give, I don't know, I'm just wondering, a wrong result, like in the example of the banana, for example. So what do you think about this?
Well, I think if you have the opportunity to put logic in your technology that can identify wrong settings or scenarios where it makes no sense, I think it would be prudent to put that logic in there and then advise the user that you're doing stuff that doesn't make sense. If you can, some will be able to do that, others will not, and basically, well, you are not able to control how people use your technology, and what you put in their hands. They can do completely horrendous parts. But I think spending a little time on finding out, can someone ridicule my project by doing something which should be obviously not possible? If it is blatantly clear that what they're trying to do with your product is not possible and meaningful, then there's also no sensational value in publishing it on YouTube, right? But if there's some scenario where that makes sense, where your product should behave in an intelligent way and it doesn't, that's when you're vulnerable. So it's a kind of like risk management thing, and we will come to that point. Are there anywhere that this would actually could develop and work in a way that it shouldn't? And does that impact my business in a negative way? Then I should probably make sure that if it is used in that kind of setting, that I have a meaningful response that can take away the sting. I think this is it's a bit theoretical, but I think you get my point. Okay, let's move on. So risk and mitigation. Basically, I will touch these points as examples, just to give a brief idea of what I'm thinking about, just for the class. I'm not going to do extensive risk mapping because that will take forever. But I just want to put these headlines on your desk, so you will be looking at each of these points to see if there's any risk in this particular area that you need to mitigate. And I'm just going to start by saying that I actually like the Prince2 model of risk management. Prince2 is a very, very comprehensive framework for project management, which is basically useless for most purposes. But they do have some points in which they are very excellent, like how they've done the action items and stuff. But they also have a good method for very simple risk mapping. And risk mapping is like stakeholder mapping is not something you finish with. It's something you do every week. And you keep circling back because the risk changes, because the world changes and all that. So what you want to do is basically to make a very simple spreadsheet. It's not a big deal. And you want to identify risks in the areas that are defined above, and you want to identify the risk for the severity. How likely are they to happen? What is the economic impact? And how do I preventively or preemptively take away the potential or the severity of this risk? So if I identify a very severe risk with a very high likelihood to happen with a big economic impact, that when you have, if you sort of like score them and say the severity is a point from 1 to 5, likelihood is a point from 1 to 5, economic is a point from 1 to 5. Now, if you have 3 5s, so it's 5 times 5 times 5, which is a lot. And that can sort of like mathematically tell you which ones of these risks are your priority to mitigate, and put your efforts on that. But it's you don't have to do the calculation, because it will be there's very clear to you guys that once you put the risk down, say, okay, this is really a problem if it happens. What is the likelihood of this to happen? If the likelihood is high under these circumstances, you should address those circumstances. So you reduce either the severity, the likelihood to happen, or the economic impact, or all three, to bring it down from a very, very dangerous risk to something that is not so dangerous. This is exactly how you do in medical devices. In your entire risk profile, when you work with medical devices, it's all about, when you change your device, it's all about evaluating what is the risk for the patient to die, finding out the severity, the likelihood, and economic impact, and then changing those parameters by changing your product to take away the impact of the risk in order to pass through the audit process. Same, exactly the same. Monthly is maybe not too often, maybe it is not often enough, but I think the point is you need to circle back to the risks and complete your risk assessment all the time, because things may have changed that you weren't noticing. So going back and having a checklist is important. And checklists is something that pilots use before every significant action they do, like before starting, before landing, before changing attitude and stuff. They always have a checklist. And pilots, they say, and I know because I'm actually a pilot, checklists are written in blood of the people who didn't know or didn't do. And this is pretty much the same philosophy on risk management. You need to check, and you need to have a list of things you check on the risk. So if you identified risk, you need to check it, and you don't remove it until it's mitigated. And if you don't check, at some point, it will bite you in the ass. So risk management is important. So let's just carry on and see what the different areas are. And this is just examples. Of course, there's a lot of things that are network and business as usual. So I'm going to try to focus on risk that are like objective risk here. So the risks of your stakeholder map, just to relate to that for the network, is that you don't have the buttons. Basically, you don't have the buttons, and they cannot be used to help the company. That is a high risk, because at some point you will need it. So you need to have potential cards to play. It's like playing cards. If you have a lot of cards, you can play a lot of different stuff. If you have one card, you can't play a lot. So get yourself cards on the hand. And to build that, I cannot say often enough that you need to network, talk to people, listen, learn, interact, extend your network, and be there. So don't live behind a closed door on the phone. Get out there and meet people. That's easier now than before, but still. On the competitive side, so competitors are catching up, and I think this is a risk that we all face, and it's permanent. It's continuing all the time. So, and this can be a risk that can be manifested in so many ways. So what I will say here is more generic, in the sense that, in my experience, if competitors are biting your heels, looking in the rearview mirror and worrying about it is not helpful. Don't look back. If you're driving down the road with 200 miles per hour, you don't want to spend half the time in your rearview mirror, because you're going to hit something. You want to look forward. You want to accelerate. You want to build the narratives. You want to find out what are my advantages, what are my secret sauce, what is my unfair advantage, and how do I build on that to make it even more powerful, even stronger with a small investment as possible. And then build about references and traction, and get people to tell about the product, and get references and get statements out there, and get to know your clients extremely well. Again, they are stakeholders, and the more you talk to them, the more you know about how they experience your product. And that is a goldmine of knowledge and references that you can use to distance yourself from your competitors. But other than that, from my point of view, the most important part is not to look back, but to keep doing, keep accelerating, keep moving your product, keep innovating, and keep expanding the things you can do, and the way you can do it, and the problems you can solve. And preferably do it before the competition. But if you can do it before the competition, then do it better than the competition, and let them carry the load of the first wave. Speed is life. In terms of competition, speed is life, and the risk that I think is most important for you as a manager and business owner to assess is, do I have speed enough to get off the ground and compete in this race? if you are bogged down with looking over your shoulder and worrying about investors and all that, then you may have a problem. So you need to fix that so you can focus on getting your product moved and accelerated. Because if you at some point find yourself spending all your time on things that are not product related and developing your stuff and do that, if you spend too long time on that, then eventually someone will just overtake you because you're looking over the shoulder and not focusing on the road. So don't let up the foot, keep it on the speeder all the time. Regulatory is something that is extremely risk prone, and there's a lot of risk here, and some of them you can do something about, some of them you can. So for the regulatory side, what I've seen is that the quality management system is extremely complicated and takes a long time to implement. And if you don't know how to do it, you may be in a problem position where you spend a lot of time and effort on this and waving your arms and going in different directions before you found out how much it hurts and what you need to do to get somewhere. So it's also very expensive to maintain an update, or can be. I had a business I'm working with that said, okay, we're going to do ISO 13485, but we are in a big hurry. So we're going to do it as a paper-based system to get our ISO certificate, and then we can move from there. So they did this very, very complicated paper-based ISO 13485 system besides their product. So they have like the product they're developing and all the engineers working and all the documentation for the system and all that. And then they have an entirely different system on the side of it, which is the quality management system, which should basically, it has the job of regulating how people work. So you have this one system here and the development here, and they are not connected, which means that you spend an enormous amount of time building this and then keeping it synchronized with the development. And all the synchronization is a huge effort, because every time you change anything in product, there's a lot of back and forth with the quality management system. And somebody has to do that diligently, and you can hire 10 people to do that. So if these things are disconnected, then it's going to be very, very difficult. So in order to do that, I think I'm just going to wait the notified bodies, because I've spoken to that before. But the quality management system and the regulatory risk that is the biggest challenge and the biggest problem you will face is, how do I go about building a totally automated electronic quality assurance system, and how do I make it in a way that it overlaps with my production? So if I want to make the absolute best investment at all, I will build the quality management systems as a part of my production. So I will not have a developer that does stuff that is not automatically handled by the quality management system. So if you have a guideline for how to develop source code and how to deploy, all of this should be described and documented in the quality management systems. So documenting things is a very important part, but doing it in the same way is also important part. So in my business, we have invested in doing 100% electronic quality management system, and it is embedded in our production system. So there's no production system and quality management system. There's just one system, which is both the production environment, which is based on Jira and Zendesk and tickets and prescriber and procedures. And then we have tweaked the production system so that it is compliant with the quality management demands. So there is no discernible difference between the way we produce software and the quality management system. It is the same. So in this way, you make sure that when people work, they are inside the quality management system and not outside. And that way, you take away a lot of the pain of documenting that your system is compliant with the quality management system. And if you don't do this, at some point, it will be extremely expensive, and you will have a lot of energy. Every time you go into audit, there'll be a lot of cleanup, and it will look messy, and you will regret it. So in order for the regulatory risk to be taken, a lot of this is in the preparation and development of the quality management system, and making sure that your production and quality management system is the same. It's not easy, and you need to get people who knows what this is about. So that's an important part. And then that was one of the risks. And the other risk is that the notified bodies in the EU are too busy to take clients. And I think I ranted about that the last time, where I said that the notified bodies are businesses. We have 22 in Europe. They are all swamped by the big corporations that has lots of dollars, because they prioritize the one with the big bucks, which means that all the small companies like us are basically screwed, because we can't get any slots for certification or audits in the notified bodies if you want to have a CE mark. They do have capacity for ISO certification for 13485. Yes, they do, but they can do CE mark before end 2023, which is basically a joke because who can wait that long? So there's basically two things to do about that. Spend your energy on preparing on the FDA, because having an FDA clearance product allows you to be active on the US market, which is the biggest market in the world. Or you can go outside the EU and you use the FDA clearance to gain credibility for a product, to get traction in markets outside the EU. If you can get CE mark, and the CE mark is a total block in terms of having activity in the EU market, you can either sit down and wait and die, or you can do something else. And I would definitely recommend to have a two-pronged strategy. Work on the EU regulatory issues all the time, but have something else that can bring you business and traction if the EU is bogged down in regulatory crap, because it is, and you wouldn't hinge your entire business on these guys to be able to find the backside with both hands and solve the problems, because they don't. It's the EU, for Christ's sakes. Pardon that, I know this is an EU project, but we also have to be realistic that things do not happen overnight. And I think that the EU has made some huge mistakes in the way they have applied the notified body strategy and the MDR strategy. And this is basically a price that is paid by all the businesses that are in this area. So be creative. And one of the things that I have thought about doing is to say, okay, if I can't get the CE mark Class 2A like I need, what I can is I can document at least that I have a validated clinical product, with that been validated with real people. You can do that anywhere just by setting up a project and taking to the ethical committee, or getting a pilot license from the public institutions, because of course you can pilot stuff without the regulatory needs. Otherwise you would never be able to get the proof of the product. So that can be done. Get dispensation, find out how to set up pilots, and run that as a temporary pilot project, doing research until you can get to a point where you can get it validated and get it legalized. You can also seek dispensation for this in a normal project by stating that you have this and this and that. And I think in many projects, this licensing would be granted on the grounds that they also realize that the EU regulatory setup is challenged. I have noticed that all the tenders I've seen in the European market for businesses in the remote patient monitoring, which I'm in, are not very, very harsh on the CE mark requirement for the tender. They do not disqualify products that are not regulatory compliant. They do ask for proof. So people are not stupid. They know it's an issue, and don't get desperate, and don't get depressed about this, because it's a condition. This is part of the landscape. We can't fix it, so we have to live it, and that's about being creative and finding out ways around. All right. So in the product development, well, there's a lot of risk in product development. Basically, it's always problems with what to do and how to do it, and you have a big backlog and which way should I go. The way that I did in my early days was to say, okay, I have all these features I want to do. Who will pay? Will someone pay for having this priority feature? Then I'll take their money, and then I'll have it done. But having an intense dialogue with your best clients, your pilot clients, is going to give you a very clear identification of what is really important, and how should I do that. So the engineers will have opinions, but of course the client's opinions is king. So you need to be able to identify what is the key value driver, and what is the things that the client will pay for and prioritize, and then try to focus on doing that and nothing else, and make it as minimal as possible. Because again, if the engineers get the full run on this, it's going to be a problem. So set a release cycle. Make sure that you have a very, very clear development plan that you can communicate to the clients. I have 4 releases each year. They fall in these dates, and this is my roadmap. And then you can prioritize that to the money you have, the resource you have, the time you have, in relationship what the clients really need and what is their priority. So I think even though you don't have the time, the money, the energy, having a roadmap where you say we have these releases and we will have time for this kind of thing at that point, they are often much more able to be patient if they know what's happening. So you can say no to them, or you can say wait to them if they have confidence this is going to be later on. So, but the product development is most of you guys already there. So maybe this is just redundant, but you need to identify the risk there if there are any. And of course, I realized that the product development risk that you have can be also very external. Like you can be unable to get materials, or you can only be unable to get stuff you need. So if you have anything in your product development that can be uncontrolled risk, like affect your production, you should have a look at it. For instance, it's extremely different to get chips. So if you are based on being able, if your product is based on hardware and being able to provide computer chips, they may not be available, and this will probably affect your product. How? And that's a problem. So how do I deal with that? So it's a common sense. Try to find out what are the most horrible things that could happen to my production and product development. Try to get that in your head and do a bit of a scenario modeling, find out how to mitigate it, put it in a list, and circle back to it. So operational, there's a lot of risk in operational. Things may not work, and they may not work for a ton of different reasons, like cannot be installed, cannot be deployed, not documented, not scalable, not operational, not supported, not available. There are tons of things in the operational level that can go wrong, and this is a problem. Why? It's a problem because this is the under the hood. This is the bottom part of the iceberg. When clients see the top of the iceberg, you are selling that like crazy, and you're trying to say, oh, this is great because such and such and such. But after the sell, if the operational stuff doesn't work, it's going to fall flat on its ass, basically. So in my opinion, and in my experience, investing in the operational setup and maturity of whatever you do is extremely important, because you may have the best product in the world. It's like having the the great, like buying a Ferrari. If you buy a Ferrari, it's a fantastic car. It's like, wow, I have a Ferrari. It's been so expensive and it can drive crazy fast, but it will only drive for 5,000 miles. Then you need to change the important parts in the engine, because the basic operational capacity of this car is crap, right? So if you buy a German Porsche instead, it has a completely different hardware put together. So you can buy it. It's also expensive. You can drive a lot in it and it doesn't break. I know this is subjective, so all your Italians don't get excited. I know you have excellent cars and stuff, but just an example of, if you have something that is sellable and fantastic, it's not good enough to have it operational in the actual scenario. You also need to be able to say that this will keep working and it doesn't stop. In order for that to happen, you need to focus on the inside of your business, on the operational side. So do I have the people who know how to make this secure? Have we done a penetration test recently? If not, get it done, because penetration test is going to save your life when someone attacks your software. And many public institutions and governmental offices, they won't even consider installing it unless you have the documented security and penetration test. Is it movable? Can you move it in any cloud? If not, then there'll probably be trouble, because like in Germany, in other countries, they are very passionate about software and data being inside the hospital, inside the country, and not being able to leave it. So you need at a very early stage to have a sit down with your tech guys and your CTO and say, okay, guys, what is our capability in the operational area? Can we support it? Is available? Can we document a online availability of more than 99.9%? Can we document that? Can we factually document that? If you can't document it, then you haven't got monitoring set up on your servers, because that's the way to monitor it. That's the way to document it. If you don't have that, that is a clear indication that the maturity of your backend operation is not on par with what it should be. Every time you document something, put it in the quality management systems so everybody knows how to do it. There's no doubt. And if you change out your DevOps people, you can have the new people that comes in will know how things are done. So the same goes for backup and restores and data security, and what we call business continuity, which is like a fine word for saying what happens if things go wrong. What are you going to do if things go wrong? And this is just an example of some of the things that can go wrong. And I have seen, as a consultant in public procurement projects, I have seen so many excellent products fail because they were compliant with the features. They had excellent ingenuity, they had excellent innovation, they had excellent features, they did all the right things, but it was only operationally available 75% of the time, because the operational DevOps, the whole backend stuff, wasn't done. So you need to focus on not just the sales, but also to make things solid as you go and make sure it stays solid. So, of course, what you need to support in terms of operational capability, in terms of being able to move and install and localize and all that, that varies from product to product, because it's, of course, it's different. But you still need to spend quality time and really take good care of this baby, because the DevOps people are important when things start to go bad. And if you are challenged at some point, you will love yourself for having invested heavily in this and automating as much as possible down the line. Right. Cultural misunderstanding can do everything, can kill you. And many are working with offshore teams in Romania, in Russia, on the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Pakistan, in India, all over the world. People are doing source team, and they are very affordable. So a lot of using it. But you need to know that this requires extensive documentation, more than you usually do. You need to be very, very clear on the specifications and the targets. You need to have a quality assurance that really, really goes out of the way to check what they do and follow up on it. And you have to invest in the quality assurance, because checking and testing things that are built outside of your office is very important, because you cannot expect them to have the same understanding and same attitude towards quality and productions that you have. So in order to get that aligned, initially you will invest a lot of time in the QA. Once they get it and understand it, then those things will start to smooth out. But initially, the cultural misunderstandings from teams not in your area will be very, very very important to take care of, and they are very likely to happen if you're not looking into it, and this will cost you time. It's just an example. There are tons of different cultural stuff that will kill you if you don't take care of it. But try to identify the things that are important and possible in your setting, and try to get a mitigation plan put down. So in sales and marketing, I think there's a lot of risk in sales and marketing. Most notably, you can get a sales guy that really can sell, right? And he may have the best network and the best results, but basically he's not able to find a lead. But he may be very good at closing deals. So you also may have been barking up the wrong tree in terms of selling to the wrong channels. Maybe your sales strategy is entirely wrong. So there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong here. But the risk that I am talking about here for the sales marketing is something that is not, well, the other things can be more or less in your control. But the things that you may overlook is very, very tiny things with big impact, like things here, like you are selling features that are not validated, and according to quality management, ISO certification, and CE mark, you are not allowed to market that particular feature or that particular product because it's not approved, it's not been very validated, and so on and so forth. So this sales guy when you ask the sales guy to look into the regulatory setup about how to sell and how to do stuff, they will most likely skate over it. So you need to be able to connect the quality management department with the sales department and validate that these salespeople know the framework of what is legal and non-legal. They need to know the intended use, very, very detailed. They need to know that they can do this, they can't do that, and that they're not allowed to say that they can do this feature because it's not public. And first of all, they are not allowed to put anything in writing unless QA and you have verified it, because they will put anything in writing. They are completely crazy, and they are completely scrupulous in terms of what they will write, because they feel, these guys never check anyway, so I'm just going to write that. The problem is when you get audited by a notified body, they will bloody goddamn check the sales material and see what you wrote there and check if it's actually true. And that's a sales guy's nightmare. Actually, it's your nightmare, because if the sales guy get a free range to take to whatever kind of fiction he wants, and then you're going to be nailed by the regulatory authorities, and you will have a very hard time on cleaning up that stuff before you can move forward. So there is a risk of something falling between the chairs here. And the way to do it is to make sure that all the people, not just your sales and marketing, but also the partners you have and everybody who represents your product in any kind of context, has gone through a minimalistic tests, educational session about what they need to know about intended use and basic operational of the quality management and stuff. This training is imperative, important, and needs to be documented. And it's very, very important that they also get a test. So you have documentation that they have read and understood the things they can and cannot be allowed to do. So I think that's something that I have found out in the hard way, that you be very careful about it. Of course, I also have salespeople who were basically useless, but that was my fault because I didn't do my stakeholder mapping, or someone else's fault because I didn't get, he got hired without my intervening. But basically, screw ups and things that can go wrong with salespeople are usually things that reflect badly on you, because you're the responsible one. But this regulatory part, this can sneak under the radar, because this is stuff that you're usually not aware of. So be careful and look if there are anything else of these kind of sneaky sales and marketing risks that will be an issue for you guys. So I think that's what I'm going to do today. So we have the floor open for a few questions. I'm just going to stop sharing. Okay, hit me.
I actually have a question. Good morning. My question is, what is your time estimate? The context is the QMS, because it's a hot point. In your opinion, for a small company that is doing it like that wants to do it properly with all the tips that you suggested, what is the time window minimum if we do everything like in the most optimal way to reach the steady phase where we are on track with that, starting from like normal documentation that you may do to get to a proper quality management system with all the possible problematics? I'm not asking you to make us like a time schedule, of course. I'm saying, are we talking about like, because we are starting doing it, but do you think it can be, if we are very, very good, like a few months or 1 year, like something like that?
Yeah, well, I think when I started, I was told that I could put it in place, use a couple of months to develop the content and put it in place and activate it and run with it for 3 months and then get an audit with ISO certification. So it will be done in 3 to 6 months. And it can be done in 3 to 6 months, but in the practical world, it's difficult. So I think if you spend some time investigating what products will help you here, like for instance, we spent time and found out that if we implement all our production quality management gateways and reports in the Jira system, so all our Jira tickets reflect all the needed choices to validate the ISO 1345 points. If we put that in place, so we start producing in Jira, if we make release notes and full tracking and release tracking, all this, and using Jira as a primary tool to get the data in the development phase, that can take away a lot of the pain. And then we have the Sensu for the client interaction and the post-marketing feedback. And then we have a Confluence system, which is basically a documentation system for everything else. So the entire production, documentation, user manuals, every single piece of documentation, everybody uses is in Confluence. And the Confluence also has the quality management handbook. So everything is on Confluence. And then we added a Komala tool that does basic workflow, so you can send documents for approval. And this mechanism makes sure that whenever you approve a document, there's a track and trace function to see who approved the document and at what version is it. So these basic electronic tools give you the ability to build a system that has an integrated quality management system into your productions very, very easily. So the only thing you really need on top of that is an ISO 1345 template with as much predefined procedures as you can get. So you only have to fill out the blanks, so to speak. So you want to get a minimalistic ISO 1345 template because these are the things that need to be a part of the ISO system. And then you can fill them out, and you will do that minimalistically in the beginning to satisfy the purpose of your quality management system. And then you will find out, okay, I need to do a clinical evaluation report. I need to do the customer feedback. I need to post-market assessment, all that, because it's a part of the MDR quality management system. But all of this is doable if you start with the right tools and have this opinion, which I think is important. Don't do any quality management outside of your production and your business. There must be nowhere where you can say that this is something I update afterwards because it's not a part of my production. Well, of course, this is a principle sign. There will be, for the quality management officer will be doing stuff that the developers won't be doing, but it is important that they work in the same system. So there is not a system for the quality management and a system for the production, but it is the same system. So with this perspective, I think you will be able to get the tools operational and get a consultant that knows that can find his backside with both hands. You can get it set up and running within 2 or 3 months, and you can then activate it and put it online for 3 months, and then you can get the audit for the ISO certificate, and that will probably give you some additional work. There'll be some non-compliances. So if you are extremely good, you will be able to apply for a CE mark certificate audit within a year if you're very, very good. But since it's not possible to get a CE mark audit within the next 2 years, it doesn't really matter. So I would focus on the ISO certification if I were you, and get that done, and focus on and getting as much help as you can. There are a lot of companies by now out there that are selling like quality management as a service tools. So you get like an online system with all the quality management tools with the history mapping and all that crap. So you can just like pull it in, turn the keys, put it in the templates, and start filling out content. So it is possible, but I wouldn't listen if anyone says it can be done in less than 6 months. I would say I will call them a liar.
So you will not suggest this kind of plug and play tools?
And I think the plug and play tools are great. It's I think it's individual assessment. Plug and play tools will work very well with some. Others will want to build it like me from Jira and Zendesk and Confluence, and put in the right content. But it depends where you come from. The plug and play tools are excellent if they suit your purpose and if they work well with you. But that is an individual assessment because it depends on the business and the product and so on. So I would definitely look at the plug and play tools and try those out before I go into something home built, and because it can be a big advantage.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you have to do your homework, says Justina. Okay, anyone else? Well, we will be meeting in one-on-one, so I guess we're running out of time, but there's a good time for one more question.
Okay, it seems that nobody else has questions. So thanks, Henrik. Yeah, maybe it was very clear. Thanks, Henrik. It was a pleasure to have you, as you know, and thank you to all the teams that joined. And yes, see you all in individual sessions, and have a great week. Have a great evaluation week. And yeah, see you all later.
Thanks for your time, guys. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.